G'day, folks. It's the coach here, and we are in the Cities of Sigmar Love Fest this weekend. Literally 24 hours to the minute, we were talking all things living cities. And today, I am joined by a very special guest because it's a faction in Cities of Sigmar that I just haven't rated. It's one that I haven't justified, and I just couldn't quite understand how to make it work and I was talking to my guest in a minute. So first off, my guest is Jeremy LeFebvre. I've butchered that already. Oh, yes.
No, you did good.
Thank you. It's like a pass mark. But so Jeremy has done really well with the Phoenician. So first off, he went 5-0 in December last year in Age of Sigmar 3 at Flying Monkey Con. Well, might have been November. You probably know the dates better than I do. Yeah. But most importantly, at the end of January, you went 5-0 at the Las Vegas Open, and you got to the semifinals, only losing to the eventual winner, Gavin. So it was Cities versus Cities. I think on Twitter, I literally said it's the Who Loves Sigmar More battle. But you had played the Phoenician and essentially went 6-1 when you think about the finals run. So there's some secret sauce in there. And to set the scene for me, when I've looked at the Phoenician, I've always thought that if I built a list in the Phoenician and I took that exact same list and put it in Hammerhall or Tempest Eye, I've always felt that it's a better list. But you're going to prove me wrong. And I think for a lot of people tuning in today, they probably haven't given the Phoenician the real time of day. So for me, this is a really big learning opportunity to find out what you've learned really across the game. But before we get into the meat and potatoes, Jeremy, debut on the channel. Who are you? Where are you from? Let the internet know all about you.
Okay, well, I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've been playing Warhammer since like 6th edition fantasy. Dark Elves are my love. I've always done an MSU style, so that actually plays into how I built this list eventually and what works so well with it and why it's hard for other people to build that kind of list, I think.
Which is ironic because the minute people start talking about Dark Elves, which is essentially now Darkling Coven, Order Serpentis, and one of the others, I can't remember what the other build was. But anyway, like when you think of Dark Elves, people immediately go to like Harkness and Anvilgard because, the vitriolic spray and some of those abilities just work so well. Even Misthaven works really well with the keywords to the Darkling, the what is now the dark, the old Dark Elf stuff. But like Phoenician, man, like it's that, the battalion, the old narrative battalion was like, it's all right. It's Phoenix. You get some rules. I don't know. Like I'm open to what you're going to say to me.
And that makes sense, but you have to look at why Phoenician plays better to Dark Elves than I think those other cities, or at least the playstyle that I did when I was playing Dark Elves. Is Dark Elves where I played them as a very MSU. I have these little any units that are all expendable. They're going to do a little bit of damage and then they're going to die. And I'm just going to chip away at these big, huge blocks of troops. And so Phoenicium lets you do that in a way that no other Age of Sigmar faction army lets you do.
Yeah, and what's fascinating as well, and I know some of the feedback that I was getting yesterday in the chat when I was talking Living Cities, and people have seen Gavin's winning cities list as well as my guest Joe, who was talking about his experience from the Great Plains Masters, is your list has no dragons. That's right, folks. Not a single dragon. Not Karazai, not Krondes, no Fulminators, no Stormdrake Guard, because I think some cities people are happy to bring in the Stormcast and rely on the strength. Some people want to be pure and native to Cities of Sigmar, or at least not rely on a massive hammer from outside the city. So a bit of a sneak peek under the veil is that your list actually has no dragons.
No dragons, no hammer.
And Stormkeepers literally, our Stormcast friends literally have jumped in and said needs more dragons. Obviously, look, man, you
the
did
minute
just
you
as
put
well
dragons in that list, the list gets worse. The minute you put anything that's not a cities unit in there, the list gets worse. And that's one of the interesting things about that list. You can't. I've thought about trying to put the Stormcast in. Just none of them fit. Because if you put Stormcast in there, you're not getting the Phoenician abilities. You can't put assassins out of them. You lose your flexibility. You lose your being able to respond to different situations and different opponents.
I think what was really interesting for me, being someone that wasn't at the LVO this year, and I was sending a lot of updates on Twitter and Facebook, and I was posting the lists and I was posting the rounds, and it was really interesting because, funnily enough, at the exact same time, I was meant to be running a 100-player event, but COVID made me postpone the event. So I was really living vicariously through the LVO. And I know when I was posting lists and I was posting a lot about like what was happening at the LVO from round 1 up until the finals, your list was getting a lot of attention because people were like, what on earth is going on here? How on earth is this list doing well? And I think, assistant ref mentioned, it's very much about curiosity. And funnily enough, Gavin, who eventually won, and obviously your semi-final opponent, just, absolute, congratulating you and saying what a great opponent you were as well. So I want to get into the Phoenician and understand how you look at this, because I get a feeling the way you look at cities and the way I look at cities is going to be very different. And I think you've got to play a different play style potentially when using the Phoenician. And before we get into that, just want to give massive love to my friend Poet, who donated some dollary dues to, I don't know, keep me living off rice and noodles and stuff. So you've played this in second. So I didn't actually know that. I know you did well at Flying Monkey Con, which was third, and I know you've done well at LVO, but you've played this in second edition. Yeah. Why the Phoenician? Like, tell me about the Phoenician and why you picked that outside of just your Darkling Coven stuff.
Because the Phoenician goes to their core rules. They have 2 main abilities that when I lose a unit, I get +1 to hit and wound. So it allows me to play into everything's expendable in my army. If my opponent is winning, I am also winning. Your success makes me stronger. So I play into you wanting to succeed, so I'm stronger later in the combat phase. So I will bait you with killing certain things out of order or force you to kill things that you don't want to kill, so I get better.
It's an interesting way of looking at the world. Very interesting way of looking at the world. Because like when I looked at building list in the Phoenician, like I'm like, right. And I'll get the rules up very soon and I'll get your thoughts and how you think about it. When I looked at the Phoenician, I'm like, right, okay, for me to trigger some of the abilities in the Phoenician, I need things to die. So what's going to die? I'm like, flagellants could die. Aether wings can die. I'm like building all these things that could die. But then I'm thinking, surely my opponent is smart enough to not kill those things. Surely if there's a combat between, I don't know, a Phoenix and then Aether wings, they're going to go the Phoenix every day of the week and not clear the chaff because they know Aether wings are going to do nothing or flagellants are going to do nothing.
So you have to pick units that are a threat.
Different.
You have to pick a unit that is a threat. That is also expendable. Okay, and so when you're looking at a unit of Phoenix card, you're like, that's not expendable. I'm like, in my eyes, it is expendable. Okay.
All right. Like I said, I think we look at this game very differently, and I'm very curious to hear from you. By the way, is this the same list? Did you take? Someone did ask me this a few times. It's okay. So it's the exact same list that went from Flying Monkey Con over to
the only difference between this list and the second edition list is the second edition list had a Fire Phoenix in it, which was good in second edition, and they're just terrible in third edition. But how they changed the movement that you can't like retreat and run, so it's just like that's gone. The second edition also had another unit of Shadow Warriors, so I think it was stronger. 3 Shadow Warriors is so much more dangerous than 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think when I look at the Phoenician and just some of the things you can do, I don't know. You've obviously still done very well.
So on that list, you're talking about my opponent's smart enough not to kill any things. Well, that's where the Hurricanum comes in and the command ability from the Phoenix. So if I have the Hurricanum centered and it's also kind of a bait unit, now everything around me is hitting on 2s. So then I do the Phoenix command ability. I'm rerolling all my wounds. So now I'm hitting on 2s, rerolling wounds. If you're not killing me, if you're killing me, now I'm 2s and 2s. So either way you look at it, I'm going to be hitting you consistently with just little bits of damage.
And that's probably one thing that, you are playing the chip damage kind of, because like Phoenixes don't do that much damage. Like when you compare them to other things out there, which is why people are bringing in, dragons, for example. They are really damage dealing. They've got good rend, they've got mortal wounds. They're a good damage dealer. While you look at the options, and I know when I looked at, you're obviously building around things like phoenixes, right? Because your phoenixes heal, and there's a whole bunch of phoenix rules.
Yeah.
They're okay, but they just don't do a lot of damage because they don't have high rend, they don't have mortal wounds, they don't get additional bonuses on the charge. You can do flaming weapon, but they're just not a big damage dealer. You're just there to punch. You're almost like Nurgle. You're kind of grinding your opponent down, and through the healing and the mortal wound, like ward saves, you're playing the attrition game. Is that kind of how you look at the Phoenician?
Yeah, I would like people to attack the Phoenixes more. Not a lot of people in LVO wanted to attack the Phoenixes. They're all scared of them. They're just like, I can't kill this, why bother? And then they wander around at full wounds and they have 8 attacks apiece at 2 damage, which is actually pretty good.
It's just the rend. I think it's just the rend with the phoenixes that make it challenging. But hey, look, we're kind of getting into the meat. I will get up the lists and we will get up the rules as well. But just overall, how have you found the Phoenician? Why did you keep persisting with it? And how are you finding in the meta? Like, is the meta rewarding the Phoenician? Is it something that you'd recommend others looking into?
If you want I like it. It's rewarding to me because it's lots of little units, MSU style, where the game is played in the combat phase, activating, moving things, where things go. So it's a very finessey list, even though it doesn't look that finessey. But with the level of assassins and how you activate and get all this stuff, it can be a very finesse list and piling in and pulling things in and out. So if you're wanting a challenge, I recommend people do it. I know a lot of people are drawn to Phoenix Guard because they just don't die. But if you have that mentality, things are going to die. Like big blocks, people like to bring big blocks of units. And I don't like big blocks of units because I know how to take apart big blocks of units. So I build my list. It's like, what do I want to have an issue dealing with? Lots of little units spread all over the place where I go into this and then I'm like, okay, now I'm exposed.
And I think that's kind of how I was looking at the Phoenician. I was looking at going, right, well, I need to have multiple small units and I need a lot of chaff that will die quickly. And that's why I mentioned things like Aether Wings, Flagellants, cheap screens that I could run up that could die quickly, hopefully, and would be able to, reward the combat-y stuff that I want to do the damage. It's just that, I didn't feel like we had as much melee and damage options. I don't know. That's just how I was kind of looking. And then again, it kind of goes back to what I thought was, am I just better off putting this into Hammerhall? And I don't know. It's clearly different. And I know you said there's some shenanigans and some things differently when you start playing with it. And I think for me as well, like Hammerhall in 3rd edition, with some of the deployment maps shrinking and just the territory stuff, Hammerhall seems harder to play at the moment. And I think it's partially why we're not seeing it nearly as much on the table.
That makes sense.
Well, because you obviously you can only get one unit to fight now. You can't multiply issue the same command and do all that type of stuff. But 2, those territories and some of the battle plans have gotten a whole lot smaller. So I think I haven't seen nearly as many Hammerhall units. But this is not the Hammerhall show. This is the Phoenician show. Is there any particular units that work well in this list? Is it purely about phoenixes and phoenixes, either as frost or flame, and phoenix guards and anointed, or do you think there are other wanderers, dispossessed, who benefits well with these rules?
I think it has to be Phoenixes, and I think it's only Phoenixes because of the command ability you get for being in Phoenicium is probably one of the best command abilities in the entire game. So I think you have to have that. So you have to be planning to die, but also being able to attack when you die. So it's that living idols rules that you need.
All right, well, let's stop actually talking about it. Let's actually bring up the rules, and you can talk me through some of this logic. We're kind of dancing around it. I know you've referred to assassins already, and let's get into this, and then we'll break it down a little bit. So first off, you've got the army has to come from Ghyran. Is it the same as Living City? It means a whole lot of nothing other than some cool narrative stuff, or do you actually benefit at all coming from Ghyran?
Not in 3rd edition, really. You did in 2nd edition, but 3rd edition it don't matter.
Yeah, I agree. There's very little. There's no benefit or no impacts at all. Obviously, in previous editions where we had extra artifacts and things, yeah, different story. But you've talked about, I guess there's 3 key rules here. You've got the Vengeful revenants, you've got the Blood of the Earth Phoenix, and then you've got the Living Idols. I'll go to the revenants first, right? So you add 1 to the hit and wound rolls for attacks made by friendly Phoenician units. If any friendly Phoenician units have been destroyed in the same phase, not in the same turn, in the same phase. So that means if I lose something in combat, in the shooting phase, or the charge phase, I don't benefit from it. It has to die in the combat phase. Talk to me about this rule, because this sounds super techie, super situational, and it seems super niche.
It is. The shooting phase doesn't really help. It's hard to get in, so you want to have everything in combat. So it deploys to having like things clumped together. Like I've deployed in such a way that my Phoenix Guard are near my Phoenix. So if you want to touch one of them, you have to touch the other one. So if you want to touch something in my combat, you're bringing a couple things in combat. And then it's just, you want everything in your army to be in combat. You want everything to be engaged.
Because it's also, and one of the things as well is that it requires you to have units die, not models, units. And we all know Phoenix Guard are tanky as all hell. You know, they're 1 wound, but they've got a 4-up armor save and then a 4-up ward. So isn't that really difficult for you to take advantage of the hit +1 to hit, +1 to wound, relying on something like a Phoenix Guard to die?
It depends on the game and your opponent and how hard they hit. So that depends how you're playing the game. If you're playing in a castle or you're trying to spread out. If the Phoenix Guard are in danger of dying, then you want to have them near something. If they're not in danger of dying, you'll be in lots of little places. And it's where the little units like the Shadow Warriors and the Scourge Runner Chariot and the Assassins all come into play, because you put them into combat. And maybe they'll activate, maybe they'll not, but you just dance around and you would activate your squishy stuff first.
Yeah, I think for me that's kind of why my mind immediately went to, again, as I mentioned, some things that are more likely to screen and die, like I mentioned flagellants, I mentioned Aether Wings, I mentioned, maybe Free Guild Guard, potentially with swords or even, just spears, just things that, are going to die quickly. Or even like I'm seeing a few lists I mentioned yesterday, having some halberds, right? They can do some damage. They've got rend -1. Their armor save is trash. So if they die, they're cheap. They're going to activate some good stuff to go out and then kind of get the +1 hit, +1 to wound. I don't know. That's kind of how I looked at the Phoenician when it come to that particular ability, because I felt relying on something like Phoenix Guard or other units was just super situational, because they may not die when I need them to die.
They may not die, but that's okay, because that means they'll still be around their next round. So if they're not dying, you're still winning. So it's a win-win scenario for you. If you kill something of mine, I get stronger. If you don't kill something of mine, well, it's not dead, so it's still going to keep fighting.
So it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. If I lose something, cool, I get a boost somewhere else. But I think the key that you said is you fight in combination. So you try to make sure that you don't have just one unit in combat, because if it dies, then no one gets the benefit.
Yeah,
or
you
not
want
going to
everything in combat.
You want multiple things in combat, because then if one thing dies, then the rest of the Phoenicians are going to get +1 to hit and +1 to wound.
And this is where the Assassins actually are really key, because you pop them at the start of the combat phase. So you've already seen which charges are, where things are, and you know whose turn's going first. So at LVO, it were really good at slapping down fulminators, because people get a fulminators. Fulminators have a 1-inch reach. So then I put an assassin and lock them in from piling in, so they can't get more fulminators in. Now you have 1 or 2 fulminators that have to attack the assassin. It's gonna die.
Yeah, and what's really cool, like a lot of people probably haven't looked at the assassin rules for a while now. At least I didn't look at them properly till, since second edition. I mentioned it yesterday. I dropped the assassin pretty quickly when I couldn't take the Sword of Judgment anymore on the assassin. But I think what's really interesting is that you can pop them into any unit. So you pop them in reserve, so you don't actually have to specify where you deploy them. Which is a very big difference to me compared to my Loon Smasher fanatics, where I've got to declare specifically that my fanatics are in X unit, but then they just got to pop out as long as it is 5 or more models. So it can't pop out from a character. It needs 5 or more models. So again, the Phoenix Guard will be great. It can't pop out from a Phoenix, but the Phoenix Guard or other units.
And it has to be a Cities of Sigmar unit, and it has to only have 1 wound characteristic.
So you couldn't put them in like Pistoliers, you couldn't put them into Stormdrake Guard. It's got to have 5 or more models and a wounds characteristic of 1. So can I pop out multiple assassins from a single unit? So if I have like a Phoenix Guard and I want to have like 2 assassins on either side of the flank, that's something I can do.
So that's what gives them a very flexibility of, this is where the combat's going to be. This is the big combat of the game. All the assassins have to come out right now. And then even if they activate first, this is where that Living Idols command ability gets into so good.
Cool. So for anyone who's listening to the podcast, the Living Idols is a command ability that happens at the start of the combat phase. That's going to conflict with some of the other combat phase command abilities, obviously. And if you do so, you pick one Phoenician hero that is a Flames Fire or a Frost Heart. So it's your Phoenix it's either of your Phoenixes. And then till the end of that phase, at the end of the combat phase, if a friendly Phoenician unit model is slain while it is within 12 inches of that hero, so Frost or Flame, then that model can die before it's removed from play. So it doesn't let you fight twice.
It does let you fight twice.
Oh, it does let you fight twice. So
yes. There was errata than that it's exactly how the other fight twice abilities are worded.
So if I fight with my Phoenix Guard and then some die later, then they fight when they die as well.
Yeah, so it's really good with the assassins. So the assassins tend to double fight a lot because you put an assassin down, then you immediately activate it, it fights, and then they kill it on their activation with the fulminators that have to attack it, and then it fights again.
And it does 6 attacks, hits on 3s, wounds on 3s. Obviously, if something's died already, you get +1 to hit, +1 to wound. It's only rend 1 and it's 1 damage, but if you roll a 6 on the poison blades, it's D3 mortal wounds. So you'd like to think from 6 attacks you'll at least get 1 6.
It's feast or famine often, but I've had 3 assassins kill Archeon before.
Really?
Yeah.
I've just been so underwhelmed with like the rend and the damage. I think that's, again, it goes back to my comment about the Sword of Judgment, like back in the ye olden days.
Volume of attacks. So it's weight of dice. So say you have a 3-up save with rend 1, now you're on a 4-up save, which is almost every hero in the game. And I throw 10 dice at you, you make 10 saves, you're going to lose 5 of them.
So you're playing weight of dice because there's one trap, or at least potentially a trap, is that you put an artifact on the assassin, and I've always felt a bit weird with that. Like, is it just pushing rubbish uphill? Like, am I better off just not doing that and keeping my artifacts on some more of my powerful things? But I think back to your original point, like this is a great way to if Phoenix Guard aren't looking to die. You could pop things like assassins as well, where people might kill the assassin. It's 5 wounds, 5 up armor save. Could be easy to kill, and then that thing dies, and it helps you activate the +1 to hit, +1 to wound from the Vengeful Revenants, as well as you've got your Living Idols, where it allows to fight on death.
Well,
is that essentially it?
The Living Idols also affects everything, the Phoenix Guard, everything in near it. So, and also important thing to note about this command ability, it's an aura command ability. So you pop it from a hero, from the character, and it can affect units that get another command ability in that phase. So you can still all-out defense like a Phoenix Guard, and it still fights when you kill them, or all-out attack something else.
Yes, so your Phoenix, so the flame or the frost Phoenix that activates won't be able to use all out attack or all out defense with it, but other units would be able to because of the aura effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Adam in the chat's mentioning, weight of dice is definitely an interesting approach, especially, with all the safe stacking out there at the moment. You could have a unit that can have +1, +2, +3. When you start thinking about like cover, Mystic Shield,
Yeah.
all that defense, finest hour, but you're playing the true weight of dice. And I mean, the mortal wounds is nice as well, especially if you can spike and get, I don't know, two sixes to do 6 mortal wounds.
So also, yeah, the save stacking is important, but people can only save stack 1 unit. So it's important to have everything in combat over the entire field. So you're like, oh, I've save stacked this unit. It's like, okay, everything's going to go over here and attack this. The assassins are going to come over here. This is where you're weak. This is where I'm going to take everything, put all my damage.
So is that one of the key approaches to the Phoenician? Because I don't think if you asked any other city, they would say, I'm trying to put everything in combat at the same time. You're really trying to hit your opponent with a wave, a durable wave, and once one thing dies, and things will eventually die, especially when you look at some of the battle tactics, which might be, destroy a battle line, might be destroy your hero, destroy, some monster stuff. The battle tactics are rewarding your opponent to try to kill you, and you're really leaning into that to go, cool, well, guess what? You're going to do broken ranks, and when you do it, I'm going to get a whole bunch of boosts.
Yeah, so I charge with almost everything in my army if it's in range. I just roll a charge. Except for maybe the Hurricanum. But even that, it still gets into combat more often than I should.
You don't want to put the Hurricanum in combat. Like, it's a last resort. It's a purely last resort.
You'd be surprised how many things the horses Hurricanum have killed.
Yeah,
because,
it's true.
Because once you've killed something else, now the Hurricanum is on 3s and 4s for the horses. The wizard's on 2s, wizard's on 3s and 2s.
Okay.
It actually starts to do a little bit of damage.
Here I am worrying about the wizard, like the little wizard stick, trying to do some damage, but you're building into the horse meta of Hurricanums and Luminarchs, and because obviously they'll give you +2 to hit, or at least with the Hurricanum, you would get a reliability that if you need the +1 to hit and nothing dies, you're still got a +1.
Yep.
Not that there's a lot of -1 auras out there, but if you happen to find one, you could counteract it with a +2, -1. You're still at +1.
And the Hurricane's a nice little buff. The army doesn't rely on it, but it's also like a distraction. People are like, here's this big unit with this wizard that does all this stuff, and they try to shoot it off the table, and I'm like, okay. It was nice, but I still want everything in combat. So you have to do the mentality that everything can die. And if something dies, it's not the end of the world. Like in LVO,
I like that.
When I was playing Nagash, he handed dusted my Phoenix off, top of turn 2. Full Phoenix general. And then he handed dusted the other Phoenix off turn 4.
So that means you lose your command ability, though.
Yes. But I kept going, and I ended up winning 49-47 because I took all the objectives and stood on them as much as I could.
Yeah, okay. You've got some crazy crack science here. Like, you're just leaning in, like you want to kill me? I'm cool with that. And you're just cool, calm, and collected. I think it's definitely a different attitude. I love it. I absolutely love it. The last rule we haven't talked about, Jeremy, is the Blood of the Earth Phoenix, which is the add 1 to the wounds characteristic of the Phoenician Phoenix and Flamespire. So that would make them 13 wounds. They're base 12.
They're base 12.
Make them 13.
That's good. It's okay. It plays into a factor every now and again, but not that often.
I got to admit, Adam here, I think, is nailed it. Are we sure that you are a Cities of Sigmar player, not a Skaven? Because as a Gits player, as a Skaven player, it's just like that old, that meme? I think it's like Shrek, maybe. It's like, some of you may die, but I'm okay with that. It feels like you're just like, yep, cool.
I'm a Dark Elf player at heart. I came from Dark Elves. So my entire city is all Dark Elf themed.
Yeah, okay. How do you look at your Phoenician? Because I'm hearing, and it's it's something that I'm still struggling with a little bit, because I imagine players are like, how do I win my game, score my battle tactics, and defeat my opponent when I'm leaning into things dying? Am I suicide running things to die?
No.
Or is it more just I'm okay with if it happens?
You have to be okay with it, but you're not purposely trying to make things die. Your opponent's job is to do that. And the better your opponent is, the better they are at killing your stuff. So the better your army is.
Cool. I did want to call that out, because I can imagine some people have listened to this going, okay, cool, run Phoenician, I'm just going to suicide everything into combat. But no, you've got to think about your bubbles and the 12-inch aura. You're thinking about smart combats. You're thinking about the order of activation. And how do you, by the way, think of your order of activation? How do you prioritize who fights first and who doesn't fight first and all that good stuff?
It's all dependent on the matchup and the battle and what I'm fighting. But as a general rule, I try to pop the fight when we die, and then I fight with the things that are most likely to die. So it does two things. They get to fight before they're going to die, and if the opponent does kill them, they get to fight again. But now that they've already fought, sometimes the opponents may not want to kill them, so then it saves them from because they don't want to kill them, because then they'll attack again. So it's playing a mind game of, I'm going to activate this, and they're like, do I want to kill that? It doesn't benefit me from killing it, so they'll go activate somewhere else.
How did you find your game against Gavin, given that he's got so many mortal wounds from his fulminators? And because I can't remember exactly your run, so you might have had similar experiences with other opponents. But how did you find that duopoly, and where did you fall down in that particular game?
So I fell down in that game on the mission. The mission was entirely favored for him, and I was on the back from the get-go. It was the burn objectives, take objectives and burn them. I can't remember the name of it. And his living city that can just put all the pressure on one objective, come off the board, auto charge from a 3-inch charge from moving living cities. I was on the back burner, so I was just hoping for him to make a mistake that I could try to capitalize on, and he never really made a mistake.
No.
So I think if there's any other mission, it would be even footing, and it would be anyone's game.
Is there any armies in particular that, like, your Phoenician or your Phoenician style of army would struggle against, or you don't enjoy playing because it's like a really tough grind for you?
It depends. I had a really hard time against some Deepkin as the third game in LVO. He had like 150 shots of Deepkin, and that was pretty rough. And I barely won. I snuck it out on the last turn, but that was rough because he could shoot a lot of stuff, did a lot of combat, but so I could have some issues with shooting armies. I haven't fought super many shooting armies, but the thing with shooting armies is Phoenixes are so fast that you want to put the Phoenixes as a threat to them. And then they're shooting your Phoenixes and not things on objectives. So you want to score points while distracting their shooting.
And I guess shooting would kind of lean in a little bit as well. Like if they did shoot, let's say your Phoenixes, your Phoenix Guard, or your battle line troops that are on an objective, they're whittling the unit down. So, when they do get into combat, you're not fighting at a full strength unit. You're fighting at a minimal unit, which then plays well into dying. Two comments that I really want to call out from the chat here. One, Joe calling out that this is an interesting way to play, because as an opponent, you're right. Like when I'm across from you and I'm like, do I want to kill this or don't I want to kill this? Because if I do kill it, and I know I played around with this type of strategy with Hallow Heart, because Hallow Heart has, I've forgotten the spell's name, but basically you can do mortal wounds back based on the amount of damage. There's some shenanigans in there, right? So I can't think of the spell's name, but you force some really interesting questions: is do I want to kill this unit or don't I want to kill this unit? And if you've buffed them up to the nines, if you've been smart, you make your opponent do a really tough choice. The second comment, Jeremy, and again, this credit to you from Gavin, obviously your semi-final opponent and ultimate winner of LVO. And I think this is probably where I'm trying to understand, and I'm asking some really dumb questions, because is it the Phoenician rules or is it smart play? And I think what I'm hearing from you, Jeremy, is that this is not an easy army to play. It's rewarding and it requires skill and it requires you to make good decisions. It's definitely not Phoenician go burr and you push them up the table and lol, you go 5-0 at a tournament. You are really thinking about and nailing those micro decisions on who fights, when, where, how, how you engage your units and having multiple waves of combat as opposed to, picking and choosing battles. Again, I'll agree with Gavin here. This is definitely your expertise as well, in addition to the Phoenician rules, because on paper, Phoenician is not that attractive. I'd rather go Hammerhall. I'd rather go Tempest Die. And I still stand by that, but I'm hearing what you're saying.
No, and that makes sense because you have to do weird choices. Like when I was playing the Deepkin, it was turn 3. So the Deepkin player always strikes first turn 3. So I purposely left an assassin in combat with the turtle, so he had to eat it. So everything else got better. So then my Phoenixes go and eat all of their archers with 2s and 2s.
Love it. Love it. And we'll get to your list in a minute. I will bring up the list so we can kind of refine this a bit more and kind of understand your decision making, because as Chorf's asked, and it's probably a really good question, because I did ask you, how do you think about this from like a Duarden perspective, or how does it look like if you're free guild? And I think maybe that's part of my issue, is that I'm primarily a free guild player. So for me, I'm looking at this going, right, well, yeah, my free guild guard they're going to do well dying. My flagellants are going to die really well dying. But what's that melee hammer that I can take advantage of? And do I want to rely on, let's say, great swords to do that? And I think the answer for me would be no. But to Chorf's question is, if you didn't want to take Phoenix Guard or an over-reliance on Phoenix Guard, is there any other particular units that you would suggest that could replace the Phoenix Guard? Or is there something specific about that unit that makes them unique to you?
So there's two parts to that question. The first is, if you want, I wouldn't replace the Phoenix Guard, because the Phoenix Guard gets so much more power from being near a Phoenix. So they have a duality of being near it. So if you bring Phoenix Guard near a Phoenix, they're immune to battle shock. That plays huge when people kill like 8 of them and you're like, okay, this is going to die. And then it didn't die. And now you have two little Phoenix Guard running around, which can actually mess things up. You just think it's like 2 guys.
Is that saving you CP? Is that just now you've got units of 2 being generally annoying, and then that unit dies and you've now
it's
activated
also
the +1?
important to my grand strategy, which is domination. I want to have more units. So if I have 2 or 1, okay, I'll just go run it into a corner somewhere and I'll make sure I get my grand stratagem, which is have more units alive than you. The other thing is, Phoenix themselves have a command ability built into them that is an aura reroll wounds for Phoenix Temple. So it's only the Phoenix and the Phoenix Guard. So if you don't have Phoenix Guard, you don't get to use that command ability. Or it's only to the Phoenix, and then it loses a lot of power.
In my Hallow Heart list, I always ran a block of Phoenix Guard with the Anointed on foot. I just never had the points to run a Frost or a Flame Phoenix. And often if I did, the Phoenix would run off and, be pinning or be doing general nuisance. But yeah, the re-rolls to hit, I think it is, or re-rolls to wound.
It's re-rolls to wound, all wounds.
Yeah, it's a great command. It's not re-roll ones, it's a re-roll wounds. And they're already hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, 2 attacks, range 2, rend 1. They're a good little unit.
So back to the other part of the question, would other units do good in there? And I think other units do good in there, but they have to have a 2-inch reach, because tiny bases with a 2-inch reach is huge, because you have your unit deployed in such a way that if someone attacks you and then wipes your unit, for the living idols to attack when they die, they have to be in range of the enemy. So you need to have a long attack range so that you actually get the strikes back. Otherwise, they're just lost. So the bigger your unit is, the harder it is to actually benefit from that rule.
So is there anyone else you can think of? Like, I know people are throwing some ideas around, like, Drakespawn Knights. I probably wouldn't do Drakespawn Knights. I think I ran them in Tempest Die, and I haven't been that happy with them.
Trying to remember the Wanderers unit, the
Eternal
Wildwood
Guard?
Rangers. The Wildwood Rangers, I think, would actually be really good because they're damage 2 to monsters. So if people running lots of monsters, you run them around, and then a monster goes and eats them all. Then they all attack back with their damage 2 when they die, and probably murder the monster for killing them.
Yeah, they've got a very similar profile. Wildwood Rangers, range 2, 2 attacks, hits on 3s, wounds on 3s, Ren 1 for 1, 2 damage if it targets a monster. What else have you got? +1 bravery, +1 charge. Yeah, cool. Okay, yeah, that's not too bad. Obviously they're not nearly as resilient with the ward, but they have a very similar attack characteristic at least.
So if you want to put something else in there, I think it needs to have range 2. Okay. Otherwise, you have to deploy. It's more annoying to get all their attacks in.
Yeah, and maybe that was part of my frustration is because I would in a free guild kind of focus, I'd be focused on great swords, but great swords are only range 1. They obviously do mortals if they hit on a 6, but I think for me, yeah, it was like, and they have a very similar attack characteristic, but they're only range 1.
No, and the range 2 is actually huge because you have these little blocks. They're pointy little elves, this tiny little compact point that put out 21 attacks. Ooh. And they're 2s and 2s, so I would do games where they would consistently do like 17 wounds out of my little block of elves. And you're like, how do these do that much damage?
Yeah, I mean, cities generally aren't known to be melee specialists, which is why people dip into Stormcast and some of the others to bring in a bit more of that melee punch. So I think it's a good comment to kind of keep in mind what triggers it if you don't want to go into this Phoenix kind of style. I think it's good to know, but you are giving some up. And, even like executioners, I don't want to talk about executioners because they criminally need a War Scroll rewrite. The poor old dark. As a dark elf man, surely you can. Your heart bleeds a little bit.
I'm preferable to Blackguard. I think Blackguard are always better than executioners. Even back in old Warhammer, Blackguard performed better than executioners. Just on the math hammer, people liked executioners, but tabletop Blackguard performed better.
Yeah, the only good thing about executioners, they execute themselves. That's about it. I'm sorry. I'm just bringing up the spells and artifact choices and things like that too. I think when you look at some of the abilities, you've got 3 good. I'm going to bring up your list. I want to bring up your list and let's talk about
the artifacts for Phoenicium are kind of the worst, and the spell lore is kind of meh. And the command traits are also meh.
Again, this kind of goes back to, I think, why I looked at this and went, Hammerhall's just got better options. It's got better artifacts. I love the Hammerhall ability to switch off, one of the 2 abilities. You've got Wings of Fire. You've got so many great things. But yeah, like when you look at the spell lore, you've got the D3 heal to friendly Phoenicians, which is kind of cool. It gives you is it a bubble? It's a
bubble heal.
Yeah,
so that's actually really
nice.
Good.
Yeah, that's a really nice one to Phoenician units. So obviously doesn't reward you very much with your Phoenix Guard, but if you take multiple Phoenixes or multiple like monster type or even heroes, they're going to heal. That's quite nice.
It almost always heals an assassin or 2.
Yeah, what else you got to subtract 1 to bravery. It's okay. And then you've obviously got half movement. That's a nice one. Amber Tide's a nice one. Your casting value of 6. You pick an enemy unit within 18, and you have the movement characteristic. That's not too bad.
I think that could be good, but yeah, I doubled up on Golden Mist in my list so the command trait I picked for the general. I guess the command traits you can pick for Phoenicium. They're the one I did, which lets you cast a spell. It's important to note that it does not make you a wizard. So you do not trigger the +1 armor from Phoenixes from that command trait casting a spell.
And it does specifically say if this general is not a wizard, they know 1 spell. And it's specifically to the Phoenix spell lore. So they don't gain Mystic Shield or Arcane Bolt.
Or
it's
become
purely
a wizard.
Yeah, it doesn't. They don't gain the wizard keyword. Again, it's like Hello Heart. There's a book that does the same thing.
Yeah, all the cities have a thing that does that. It's in all the cities. So I actually really like this artifact, the Phoenix Pirate Ashes, that whenever they rolls a 6 to save, he heals a wound. So there's sometimes where he gets in fights and he's wounded and ends up the fight healed after someone attacked and less damage than he started with.
So let's go through this list. Let's put some of this theory into practice, because I'm sure people are hearing some good things and some theory from you. We've talked Phoenixes already. We've talked Phoenix Guard. We've talked about some of the cool stuff, right? But how does somebody bring this together? And maybe how do people think about this if they don't want to go, again, all Phoenixes? But the list that you've done really well, and at Flying Monkey Con and LVO, you've gone double Frostheart Phoenix. And I know you've already mentioned that the Flame Phoenix just isn't nearly as good right now. And I would agree with you. It certainly needs a bit of at least a War Scroll rewrite when it comes to the movement shenanigans. That your double Frostheart Phoenix, one is the general, and it's got that golden mist spell. So it gains a spell, and it can only cast that particular spell. It's not like the Arcane Tome. And you've also got the Phoenix Fire Ashes, which is the artifact that gives you, if an unmodified save roll for the attack is a 6, then you heal a wound to the bearer, which is quite nice. The other Phoenix has got your Arcane Tome with Flaming Weapon. I'll get you to talk about that in a minute. 3 Assassins, that's a null deploy, so they don't actually go on the table. They go hidden somewhere. And you've got the Hurricanum, which has got the Golden Mist spell as well. So you've gone double Golden Mist. 3 units of Phoenix Guard, 2 units of Shadow Warriors, and a Scourge Runner Chariot. Good to see them back on the table. It's been a while. Most interestingly, while you've got 106 wounds and very tough 106 wounds, you've gone 12 drops.
Yep.
You have thrown Battle Regiment out of the window. And it's interesting because listening to Gavin, when I listened to Harambe's Heroes, he said that he got to choose who went first in every game except for one of them. And he said that was obviously a very important part to his strategy. But you've gone YOLO, couldn't care less about drops.
Correct. So there's 2 reasons for that. I could play the arms race for drops, or I could go for getting some cool battalion rewards and play a different game. So I have 5 null drops in this list. So I put 5 things in reserve before I even put something on the table. So I almost always see how my opponent has completely deployed before I put anything on the table.
So for anyone who doesn't know what a null deployment is, folks, that means that we're not putting them physically on the table in deployment. So we're putting the Shadow Warriors in reserve. We also put the Assassins in reserve, just for anyone who might not know this terminology.
And they seem to be phasing that ability out. Most rules require you to have something on the table and then put something in reserve, but those do not have that rule that you can put nothing on the table and then put them. So my opponent will almost always pick who's going first, and they almost always pick me. So I've almost I counter deployed to how they deployed, planning on going first. So I will often go get some points, or if there's objectives, I'll go get them in the middle, put some Phoenixes on it, some Phoenix Guard, and be like, now you got to get these off because you let me go first. Good luck. If you're winning, I'll pop Assassins.
So you don't care who goes first or who goes second. You're just, if I go first, I'm just going to move up the board. I'm going to sit on objectives, especially with those Phoenix Guard and the Phoenixes, which are very durable. It becomes a tough battle to get me off the objective. But if you go second, if someone says, cool, you're going second, what changes there with your strategy? Are you going for the double turn, or are you thinking of things a little bit differently?
It depends on the board state at the end of my turn. Depends how aggressive they are. I did have one opponent at LVO that went first. Joe Cryer with his all dragons list. He deployed, and then I deployed in like a castle formation all bunched up, and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna go first. So he hit me with all of his 8 dragons and the 4 fulminators, and they bounced off. And then I killed all the dragons by turn 2, pretty much.
And I was going to ask you that, like, was that a key to your success? Because there is a lot of mortal wounds being thrown around, and, dragons terrorized the LVO. I think, 25% of the field, there was some ridiculously high number of Stormcast players. Not to say they all ran dragons. I know there was a few successful like Annihilator builds and things like that. But a lot of people, like when I open up Twitter, I'm seeing dragons being painted, especially Stormdrake Guard. I'm seeing Fulminators being run in Stormcast lists. They do a lot of mortal wounds. And I know James O'Brien, who was also the in the top 8 of LVO, he ran all dragons, and he appeared to bounce off his first opponent in the knockout series, which was 120 zombies, because a bunch of mortal wounds isn't going to do a lot against 120 zombies that can regenerate, plus a mega gargant. So do you think this really works with the meta right now, that people are just throwing mortal wounds, whether it's your sentinels, your bow snakes, if it's your the dragon type mortal wounds and all the other mortal wounds being thrown around? Does this kind of play well into that meta?
I think it does, because people expect the mortal wounds to do certain amount of damage, and then when they don't do that amount of damage, they have to rethink their strategy. And this wasn't designed to play dragons. This list was made before dragons. This dragon showed up, and this list perfectly counters dragons.
That was what I thought. I thought it definitely played well because, the ward save literally everywhere all the Null deploys, other than the Hurricanum. Stormkeep made an interesting comment, being a Stormcast, extraordinaire. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I don't know which one of them is from the Stormkeep, but anyway, they said the Phoenician Death Star seems really good against your melee Alpha Strike armies. So things like Iron Jaws, your dragons who want to do the hero phase move and burdenate the peasants. But they've commented that they feel like this list could struggle against shooting armies. So maybe it's a two-part question. Did you face any heavy shooting armies either at Flying Monkey Con, LVO, or just through your journey? And then two, how have you found them?
So I didn't find any at Flying Monkey. I did fight the heavy shooting Deepkin list at LVO. And that was rough, but the trick to those is the Phoenixes are fast enough that you have to put the Phoenixes into the shooting. And you move on to objectives, because you're tough enough to remove that you just go put on objectives. Shooting armies have a hard time getting on objectives because they want to shoot you off the objectives. So if I'm on the objective already with these pretty tough characters, you have to shoot me off of it and then get on the objective to take it from me. So you have to do something, fight me in some way. So pure shooting isn't going to beat this list. It has to be a combination of shooting, all focus firing on one part of it, and then taking it out.
And I guess you've got the Phoenixes as well, that you can race them up the board to potentially pin your opponent in the backfield and slow them down from scoring, while your Phoenix Guard, your Shadow Warriors, things like that are sitting on objectives. You can do that with
the Shadow Warriors too. I've also put the Shadow Warriors, deep strike them right in front of their lines and be like, kill the Shadow Warriors. They're a speed bump. They're just there to slow you down. They're going to die, but they're just slowing you down long enough for me to get ahead on points.
Does this list? I'll acknowledge Kenny's question, and then I'll get back into the list. This is good kind of logic and thinking behind it. Kenny had asked, would you change this list post LVO? Are you happy with it, or do you think there's some tweaks to happen?
The only thing I might change is the command trait, but other than that, it's not changing.
What would you change? Have you any thoughts?
So there's the command trait. It's
like Aura of Serenity is. Aura of Serenity is rubbish for you because it just means you don't take friendly battle shock for Phoenician. Like it's not
the other
worth
one.
It for you. Add one to the attack characteristics of the general's melee weapons if one or more friendly models have been slain. Add 3 if there's 5 models that have been slain in the same turn.
So often the general is fighting like last in the combat phase. So the opponent's already killed all their stuff. So if you kill 3 things, that's characteristic of the melee weapon. So it actually affects the general and the Phoenix. So that means at full strength you have 7 attacks from the general, 11 attacks from a Phoenix. That could do some damage.
Especially if you hit it with like a flaming weapon. And what's cool is it's models, not it's not units. Because you losing 3 units in a combat would be very difficult, especially in your build. but losing 3 models, especially as you've got a lot of single wound models, is very achievable.
Yeah, especially when I start charging with the Shadow Warriors.
Yeah, they don't last along they're very good. You drop them in cover and they can, get some extra boost, but they don't last very long when they're charged.
No. But they're a threat when you charge. So just dropping Shadow Warriors and getting a Shadow Warriors into someone's flanks, people are like, it's just Shadow Warriors. They're on 3s and 4s. But then all of a sudden, you say you've killed a unit. Now the Shadow Warriors are on 2s and 3s, and I can pop assassins out of them. So now this Null threat became a really big threat.
Assistant Ref in the chat made a good comment as well. Maybe things like Master of Magic might be a good command trait to incorporate as well to boost up some of that spell reliability.
And that's a good point. And I might do that. I may change the command trait to that and move the flaming weapon around to the general so they have that, because that's actually the thing that really hurt me in the game versus Gavin. I filled all my spells round 1, so I couldn't be aggressive. And it was just like, I can't go put these out there because I didn't get a single spell off. So it's when my army is the most vulnerable.
And to be honest with you, you're not the strongest magic casting. You don't have a lot of pluses to cast.
Yeah. As a player, I hate magic. I have magic in this list because the Phoenixes rely on it.
Well, it could be worse. Again, I go back to Gavin's podcast. I think he mentioned, I think one of his opponents, Marathi, killed herself because she was on 1 wound left, rolled a miscast and killed herself because she was already on 11 wounds. So it can be punishing, but there's a lot of magic in the meta right now. There's a lot of like Zench. I mean, there was when I looked at the LVO, there was underwhelming number of Zench. There was an underwhelming number of Seraphon, especially magical Seraphon. It was certainly more Thunder Lizards from memory than there was like Slan, Croak kind of. Certainly Lumineth didn't do very well. There was almost no Lumineth near the top. Like it was crazy amount of lack of Lumineth. I think a lot of Stormcast players came from Lumineth. There just wasn't a lot of magic. So I think, coming up against you, if you do fight against, how'd you go with Nagash? Nagash would have just like stopped you at bay.
I didn't cast spells. I tried. They didn't go off. I got spells off round 1 because I deployed outside of Nagash's dispel range, and then I never got a spell off the entire game.
And I think Chorf making a good comment like you, but one of the different builds to this could be bringing in a sorceress with that unit of Dread Spears, for example, who 1, the Dread Spears are going to die, but 2, you get a bit more magical reliability. And again, what's great is that this is not, Jeremy's not saying this is the one and only way to play. This is just an example, and you can pivot and you can kind of move things around. But one thing that I really like about your list, mate, is how tanky it is. Like this is toe-to-toe Nurgle type stuff. Like you will just sit there and it's just a grind, and a frustrating grind to take your troops off. Throw an Emerald Life Swarm in and bringing back those Phoenix Guard, which I used to do in Halo Heart, and your opponent just hates you. Like they're just swearing under their breath.
Yeah, and I've considered that, taking the Chariot out and putting in a Life Swarm. But the Chariot actually does a lot more than it looks like, because I can be all tanking, and then the Chariot can go be disposable getting an objective. Like turn 1, I'm just going to go put this Chariot's toe in this objective. So you have to go deal with it with something, which means you have less forces directed towards my main force, or you're letting it be. So to me, that's a win-win scenario. You're either going to go kill this thing, or you're not going to kill this thing. You have a tough choice, and I'm fine with either one of your choices. So you don't have a correct choice. So it's a mental game where you're putting your opponent and making them make tough choices where they're going to second guess themselves, and I don't care what they choose.
Let me unpack that, because I think Gavin mentioned earlier in the chat. I know it's not the Gavin show, but Gavin had made a comment in the chat today about the fact that this is a lot about your play style as opposed to the list and the army. So how do you make someone make tough choices with something like the Phoenician? Like what is in your mind when it comes to your movement, whether it comes to when you charge or who you charge or how you look at the battlefield? Like, let me get into your mind here for a second. And what is it that makes this list with you good?
You want to play the objectives, but you also want to just put them in tough situations. Since we were talking about Gavin, we could talk about the game. He charged me in with his fulminators. He was going to kill all of my Phoenix Guard, but I put 2 assassins in combat range. He could either move around to try to attack them or ignore them and hit them in. So he had to make a decision. Do I go try to kill these assassins and pull this Phoenix in, or do I stay in the back? He chose to go in and kill the assassins. Luckily for him, he killed the assassins. When the assassins died, they killed the fulminator that brought the Phoenix into combat, so then the Phoenix was out of combat again.
When you say play the objective, because this gets thrown around a lot, like just play the, what does that mean? What does that mean to you specifically? Like, imagine I was a intro player and you're like, Anthony, you need to play the objective. What does that mean?
Don't get caught up on killing things, because killing things is fun and you want to murder things. But say you look at the stage like, okay, I have this objective. I'm probably not going to kill this character. And I did this a lot versus Nagash, so I just retreated from combat and stayed on the objective and just out-modeled Nagash. Nagash is 5 wounds. I'm just like, I'm not going to fight you. I'm going to put these 6 blackguard 3 inches away from Nagash, get my objective point, let you go, and then you have to kill those blackguard on your turn.
What else does that mean? Because I agree, and anyone who's listened to this channel in the past will know that I will say one of the most underutilized strategies in Age of Sigmar is retreat. We get to the tabletop and we get bloodthirsty and we just want to fight our way from the combat, when actually the best decision might actually be retreat, redeploy, get away from your opponent and secure the objective, as opposed to, can I kill them? Can I kill them quickly? So I agree 150 million times.
Yeah. One thing I got to get better at is deploying a round objective so that when someone charges me, they're not on the objective.
So you want to screen, you're essentially moving up the board and then screening off the objective. So even if they hit the charge or the pile in, their bodies are not in scoring range. So, and if you can block the pile in, it means that even if they do kill that unit, they're not in scoring range.
Yeah. And even if they get a big enough charge that maybe they come around and then can pile in, that's what the assassin's for. The assassins, you can drop them at the start of combat and stop a pile in. Like, I don't want you to go this direction. I'm going to put an assassin over here and lock you in.
And that would obviously work with like a flying unit as well. If my opponent could leap my screen and they got a great charge roll, you could pop an assassin at the back and deny charges, would deny positioning pile-ins, or even just you get to dictate where the combat happens because you've now put a body here and you've got to go around further, or it's hard to get into that juicy stuff.
And I want you to be into combat with everything. So I want you to I need to be as much front as possible. So I want you to bring the Phoenix in. I want you to bring another unit of Blackguard in. They're like, what's... A lot of people are like, oh, I'm only within 2 inches of that one Blackguard. But my Blackguard are so bunched together with a 2-inch reach that they have a 5-inch threat. So you're like, okay, now all but 2 of them attack you because they have such a threat range. So it's these minor little auras, overlapping auras in combat.
So when you're moving up your bodies, are you ensuring? Because this is something that I used to do in. So when I used to play my Cities of Sigmar, especially when I played my free guild, and I love my little hold the line combination with the handgunners, crossbowmen, and the swordsman or whatever, right? And I was always really conscious of having screens and having like my free guild guard at the front, and then handgunners within 3 inches. So when you hit the charge on my swordsman, my handgunners could shoot because they were within 3. And but still reduce the amount of combat they would receive back, because there'd be like a 2-inch gap, so it means unless they had like a 3-inch, they wouldn't be able to actually hit the handgunners. But when you think about moving your bodies up, right, how do you ensure that your phoenixes are still going to be in combat ranges when someone charges you? Is there certain distances you have between your battle line and your monsters at the back, or how do you think about movement?
It often depends on the run that the Phoenix Guard get. on my first turn, or how far I have to move the Hurricanum up to get a turn 1 shot on something, because it has an 18-inch range with a 10-inch move. So you can often get a cheeky shot on something. So that'll often dictate how I move, is where does this Hurricanum have to go, and how do I then protect it?
Yeah, one of the challenges with Hurricanums is, and it's partially why I like some, again, Wings of Fire and some of the other cities, because you can get them, because it's very limiting. They've got like a movement 11, they don't fly, and it's easy to kind of block yourself off or even keep up with some of your more faster troops. But at least with Phoenix Guard, they're going to keep up well.
So when I deploy, I often have one Phoenix on each side, and they have Phoenix Guard in front of them. So they have a unit of Phoenix Guard, and then there's one Phoenix Guard that's around the Hurricanum, which is generally in the center of them. So that I deploy, they're all within 12 inches, so if any of them get the spell off, they all get their buff.
Yes, because you've got to be within 12 inches, and then you roll a 2 up, and you get the +1 save, right? It's a 12-inch bubble?
It's a 12-inch if you get a spell off within 12 inches of them. And then you want to make sure that the Phoenix, depending on who you're fighting, is a little more than just not quite touching the Phoenix Guard, so it's not within an inch of whoever touches it. And what this does is it stops stuff like Archeon's Sword of Kings, which only has a 1-inch reach. Because at Flying Monkey Con, I fought 3 Archeons in a row.
At least the rules have changed between Flying Monkey Con and LVO, and you're probably going to see a whole lot less of Archeon.
But this list killed 3 Archeons in a row.
How does it compare with some of the other meta armies, whether it's like Suns or we talked about like Lumineth and KO and Dragons. I mean, we obviously talked about Dragons, Joe Cry's list, for example, not being able to cut through with just the amount of wards you've got. What about some of the other builds? Like does Megas cause you an issue?
I've not fought a full Mega list. I did fight a Night Hunt player with 1 giant round 1. And he got the giant into me turn 1 because he managed to shoot enough and get a long enough charge. So that was pretty scary. And he made the problem of splitting his attacks. He's like, this is the attack that's good against monsters. This is the attack that's good against Phoenix Guard, and only did a couple wounds here and there. And then I just ground the dragon. I just ground it down after 3 rounds of combat of it just doing a couple wounds and then a couple wounds and then a couple wounds, and then I get everything else in to come help it. And
that probably comes back really well to what you said earlier about using bodies to deny the objective. So if you can screen the objective so that a Mega can't get on top of it, if you're fast enough to get at the front, a Mega might count as 20 on an objective, but if you stop it, especially with your Phoenix Guard, unfortunately, if it's like a Kraken Eater, it'll just auto slain models if it puts it in its bag. But that's kind of how you would stop a Mega, right? Because you don't have the bodies, but you can grind them down by denying them from even getting on there.
Yeah, I've done the math, and I can reliably kill a Gargant in combat pretty easily with the Phoenix Guard, with rerolling the wounds and get everything in there. And then when it kills stuff, they fight when they die because it's going to kill stuff. It's a giant. It's going to put stuff in a bag, and then I'm going to stab you through the bag.
Yeah, will that count? Because it's count as slain.
Yep.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, of course it would. And that obviously work well with the general command trait. Not the unit would have to die to get the command ability, but at least if you switch the general to the Seeker of Vengeance, it would count to that.
And lots of little shots. The Shadow Warriors could put a couple wounds on a Gargant turn, so you just focus fire on it. There are only 4 of them, and you know where they're going to be.
What's the key to your success with this? I think, if I was to start to distill this down and, you're going to teach me to play the Phoenician, like what's the key to this? Is it the wards? Because you got a lot of wards, and that's probably what I kind of assumed from this is you got a lot of wards, a lot of debuffing with the double Phoenix bubbles. You've got 2 bubbles of -1 to wound, so it helps make them even more durable. You're probably not giving away many battle tactics because it's very hard to kill your units, and you've got healing and you've got other things that are coming into play. Is that kind of like, your strategy and what you found in a nutshell, or is there other things that, if I peel the onion back a little further, there's more to this?
I think we've peeled the onion back pretty good. That the wards certainly help, but I think one of my playstyles is I used to play very glass cannon armies, dark elves, daughters of Cain is my other army. So then I switched to having that same playstyle with an army that just doesn't die. That all those little things I've learned here are even magnified when I have a 4-up ward.
Yeah, like I'm just looking at this, you've got 3 units of, like your Phoenix Guard of your battle line, and broken ranks. To pull down the Phoenix is a lot of focus for your Phoenix Guard, and your Shadow Warriors are Null deploying. It obviously plays well to, especially if you get like long strikes, bow snakes, lumineth archers at the back. You can at least drop down 2 units of Shadow Warriors to at least try to take some of those down, and they're chip mortal wounds. I mean, the long strikes can do a bit more damage than that, but to pull down some of your troops, like if you lost your Hurricanum, is that a big loss to your army?
No.
Obviously, you'd lose the +1 to save, or at least you've lost a bit more of the reliable.
I've lost a cast, which could hurt, but at the end of the day, it's not a big loss because it means they have to be killing the Hurricanum, and it's often not out in an exposed area, so they have to be sacrificing something to be able to get the shots on the Hurricanum. Whether it's dragons are too close or this archers are range of this Phoenix now.
And I guess because it doesn't have a ward save,
no.
And it's very unlikely to be in combat too. So at least you can use heroic recovery if required.
It has a bravery of 6, so don't do that. I've fallen into that trap a couple times. I'm like, I'm going to recover this.
If
bravery.
You need to,
no, I'm not.
Yeah, I tried that with my Free Guild General on Griffin, and I'm like, you're right. Actually, now I think about I'm like, yeah, the Free Guild General on Griffin. I think I rolled boxcars twice. I'm like, why? You suck. Why do you do that? But you could use Golden Mist to obviously heal D3,
no,
which
it gets
help.
healed with Golden Mist pretty reliably. So, and it has a nice little chunk of spells. Chain Lightning is really good if someone deploys wrong. Chain Lightning's really good against me because I deploy in a nice little bubble.
Yeah, you're playing, I guess if you're thinking the play style, you're playing Ultimate Castle here. Do you struggle with
I'm not playing Ultimate Castle. I play Ultimate Castle only against certain lists. Like against a dragon list, I have to do Ultimate Castle. If you're a spread out list, then I can be spread out to match you. So this list can play all kinds of different ways.
I was just reading Gavin's question, comment, which actually a really good one. He said, from an outsider looking in, most armies have an engine that the army plays through in an obvious manner. And you're right. I think, I've made some early assumptions when I was looking at your list, and even like watching your path to glory through the LVO. I'm like, right, he's doing this, he's doing this. This is how the Phoenix is and the Phoenix Guard and the ward. And I had this rough idea of what you were doing. But, when you look at this list, which is not very obvious at first, and I think this is kind of where like the assassins come into play, the Shadow Warriors come into play, it then starts making you think a bit more about how you draw your power from the whole army, as opposed to, kill Nagash and, the army crumbles. You kill X and, the army crumbles. You don't have, I guess, a linchpin. So, which makes it, again, as an opponent, tough to handle.
Yeah. People think the Hurricanum is the linchpin, and that's perfect because it's a distraction. It's not the linchpin. It makes you think it's the linchpin. It's there to do something that I need to do mortal wounds. Say I'm fighting against a Kragnos, something on a 2-up save. I need to have something I can do a little bit of reliable mortal wounds. So it's there as a safety net to make sure that I get a couple good turns of combat, but I don't need it. The biggest linchpin in the army is the Phoenixes, and that's why there's 2 of them. Because what's actually really dangerous to this army is roar. Because if you roar my Phoenix, I can't get my living idols off. So I have to have 2 Phoenixes, often near the very important combats, so I can reliably make sure that. And if you don't roar my Phoenixes, then I get to fight when I die and reroll wounds, and then you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, I think some of the lists that I had when I was playing around with this, I had definitely 2 Phoenixes, sometimes playing with 3. But definitely, you can't rely on 1 Phoenix maybe talking about Phoenixes, how does this list differ if they were Fire Phoenixes and not Frost Phoenixes?
So if they're Fire Phoenixes, it means you're not gonna castle as much, and you want to be hyper aggressive with them. Fire Phoenixes, you want to have them in combat, and you want your opponent to decide if they want to kill it or not, because there's a 50-50 chance it comes back at full wounds. So
Yes,
when
and
it
it
comes
does
back
like,
at full wounds, they will be completely demoralized.
and it can do like 5 mortal wounds if it passes over to you.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of why Fire Phoenixes probably did better in Tempest Eye, where you get that +3 move in the first turn. Or there's some other, cities that do have some movement shenanigans, but I think one of the challenges, as you've already mentioned, is that the rule, you used to be able to retreat. So if you were locked in combat, you could retreat and then still do those mortal wounds when you retreat over. Now it doesn't work like that. It's
Or
only
run to get the little extra movement you need to ping someone. Now you have to
yes,
be. So now it's just so much harder to do. That you're like,
yeah.
and they're worse in combat than the Frost Phoenix. If they were the same in combat, I would be like, okay, it's still kind of worth it, but they're just worse.
And it's the -1 to wound bubble, because there's not a lot of ways to get +1 to wound. So the minute you can start getting -1, it really does degrade people's weapon profiles, or forces them to use things like Finest Hour. No, is it Titanic Jewel or Finest Hour that gives you +1 to wounds?
Finest
One of
Hour.
the two. Yeah, Finest
Hour.
Hour. So it forces you to do that if you're stuck in combat,
No.
where you might want to be generating the CP instead.
Yeah, and the Phoenix is just the Phoenix -1 wound aura can almost be an auto win against certain armies. If you're going against the Daughter's army, they wound on 4s in combat. Now you're wounding on 5s. You're going to an
Well,
army that
even
already. It's just they can't recover from that. You can't do enough wounds to get through the already tough Phoenix.
I know I played a game with my Mega Gargants once against a Phoenix, and one of the challenges I had is they have traditionally they have low volume of attacks, but high volume of damage. So the minute you bring that from a 3 to a 4 or a 4 to a 5, and it's 6 damage or 3 damage or something ridiculous like Ren 3, like you can deny your Mega Gargants and certain heroes pretty quickly, or force them to use a command ability where they fight at the top of the bracket. So there's a lot of like cool shenanigans that you're playing around with here, and it just kind of combines really nicely between the Phoenician rules, the Phoenix rules, the ward, the durability, and I think you're certainly well positioned in the meta right now. It's just that you didn't know that you were kind of leaning into a mortal wound meta, just kind of a happy accident.
I play the list I like that fits my play style.
No, I dig it. Last question, I think, Jeremy, before I let you go, because this has been cool. I think it's again, I think I'll probably get off this call and I'll probably reflect and have a think about the way you've talked about your army, because it's certainly not the way I assumed the Phoenician would work. And I haven't seen a lot of really good Phoenician lists out there, again, probably because it's not obvious. And like I said to you right at the start, if I took this list and put it in Hammerhall or Tempest Eye or some other city, I just feel that, it's probably at least more obvious it would be a better list. But I'm hearing a lot of counterpoints to my thinking.
Yeah. Do you think my list would be better in a different city?
Well, that was my last question. So don't go there yet. My last question was going to be, is if you took this list, and I'll bring up the list again for the folks at home. If I brought this, if you took this list and you did nothing more, obviously change the artifacts and command traits, ignore that for a second. But if you took those units and put them into Greywater, Tempest Eye, Living City, some other faction, how does it change? And does it get better? Does it get worse? Like how does this list change when you put it into a different city?
It probably depends on the city. I think it gets overall worse because you lose the punch of the assassins. You can't, if you pop all the assassins at once, people will kill them before they get a punch off. They don't get to do anything. So it loses a lot of its interplay that relies on the Phoenician 2 core abilities, which is fighting when you die, and when something dies, we get stronger. So there is that.
Cool. And I think, GM Kenny, has probably wrapped up the show quite well. Is that, you are a good combination of play style and rule synergy. So you're definitely not picking up the hottest meta out there and you're just, abusing it and spamming, the sexy stuff. It is a combination of hard work, making the micro decisions. And this game is really micro decisions. If you think you just pick up a list and just, you saw an LVO list that did really well, I'm just going to do it and get the same result. I think you'd be horribly surprised. But I think, to the point, you've shared a lot of interesting counterpoints and you might inspire some people to revisit Phoenician. I know there's certainly a lot of high elf fans that might have your Phoenix Guard, your Phoenixes, those native. I know we all can't run Manticores as Phoenixes, but it was, it's definitely something to reconsider. And I think to assistant ref's point, I don't think it works as well. And if I put this list, for example, into Hammerhall, I could double fight with the Phoenix, but they're not
Tough.
strong. They're not that good in combat. Like they don't have the highest ren, they don't have the highest damage.
No, and I think the problem with people building Phoenicium lists is people think of Phoenicium as high elf, big, elite, strong, march on the field and win, where the rules are actually dark elf rules. So it's like the city is at odds with itself.
Yeah, no, I love it. I was just thinking of the irony of Chorf Plus talking about Cities of Sigmar being a placeholder. Enjoy it while you can. Well, Mr. Duarden Oathbreaker, call him the Kettle Black. I have to relook at the rules, but when you fight on death, do you get the +1 to hit, +1 to wound for the first unit that dies?
So that came up in LVO. I've never played it that way, and I still think you do not get it for the unit that dies. First unit that dies, you do not get it because a unit is not destroyed till the last model is removed from play, and once it's removed from play, it can no longer fight.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking. I was like, wait a second, it would have to be removed from the table, which technically means it doesn't.
So if someone goes and kills like 3 different units in one fight with one activation, the first unit I remove doesn't get the +1, but the next ones do.
Yes. Yeah.
Even if they died from the same combat in the same round of attacks. Okay. So it's very important to play your models that are dead and then pick them off in a certain order.
So you might, if you let's say, I don't know, some super badass, I don't know, Maw Crusher come in and like Kragnos came in and just like absolutely obliterated, I don't know, 2 units, remove the one that's less good first and then get
what you do is you remove the assassins first. So Fulminators came in and killed 2 assassins. I remove 1 assassin. It fights when it dies on 3s and 3s. The next assassin fights when it dies on 2s and 2s.
Yes, and obviously the +1 hit, +1 to wound isn't going to be a big boost when you try. You're really fishing for those 6s to get the mortals. But I think this comes back to the fact that you make really good micro decisions. Well, actually, let's end that. Let's end it there. What makes a good micro decision? Like when you are choosing to move models, when you are choosing who to fight first, when you are choosing all these little micro decisions, what advice would you give me? And then we'll wrap up.
Think about what that decision does, and does it benefit you? Can I activate this unit, pile it in such a way that it brings one of the enemy units out of combat that you don't want to fight? Or can you pile it in such a way that it forces the opponent to attack it more because you want that unit to die because it's already attacked? Does it protect something else?
Yeah, I try to think, when I think about micro decisions like that, I try to think of it like a decision tree. It's what ifs. If I go first, what happens? If I go second, what happens? If I fight with this, what happens? And then, and this comes back to experience and repetitions, and in your practice games, deliberately, like there's plenty of practice games that I play where I will deliberately do something that isn't the best decision purely to see what happens. How does my unit react if it doesn't have this buff? What happens if I lost my Hurricanum? How does my army interact without this certain piece? And it's always good to test that. So when you get to a major tournament, you've got some better experience and better ideas on that decision tree, because constantly as a great tournament player, you are constantly being asked micro decisions, and the more decisions you make your opponent ask, the more likely they're going to make the wrong one. That's just my observation.
Yeah, and someone will kill your linchpin. Just expect it.
Especially when
expect it to go bad.
When you're flying high to the sun and you are at the top tables and you are 3-0 at day one, you are going to play really quality players, and they're going to know what to go for, so practice to see what happens if your army does lose that linchpin. I think that's a critical piece, or that spell doesn't go off. What does it look like? Yep. Jeremy, this has been awesome. I've learnt plenty, and I less hate the Phoenician. You've got me more on side of the fence than like Greywater convincing me that their army is better than Tempest Eye. But you've definitely shown me a different path. You are not the poor cousin to Hammerhall. You are definitely bringing in a different idea. I'm going to end here. Someone else called Jeremy Garcia mentioning, this guy gave me the worst beatdown I ever had in Warhammer Fantasy. So
yeah, I've played him up in Denver. That was good. Good to see you, Jeremy.
Is there anyone you want to shout out? Any games club? If people want to talk to you, are you on the Twitterverse, or are you on the socials? Or
I'm not really on Twitter. I joined your Discord because my friend got me in there, so I've been answering some questions in the city chat. I'm sure people will have more. I'll try to get to them. Just tag me.
But otherwise, like any gaming club you want to shout out and kind of give props to?
Kenny's part of the gaming club here. He's hosting a tournament in Albuquerque. We sold it out within 24 hours, so our stuff's going strong. I've been doing a lot of tournament travels with my friend James Tapia. He's who I go to LVO with. He's who I go to Denver with. So we do a lot of games and bounce off the top. So he's been a great asset.
No, this has been great. I legitimately have learned a lot for you with Phoenician, and I less hate them now. I've never understood them. I'm like why am I building crack science behind flagellants and aether wings? And I think I was just looking at it the wrong way. I was looking at just pure you need to die. But I like that your approach is, if they don't die, I don't care. If they do die, I don't care. Where I was trying to purposely build around things. I was trying to build like two ends of the pendulum, like super buffed up melee unit, things that I want to die really quickly. And if I can synergize them both really well, I'll get the most out of Phoenician.
And then as soon as you fight someone really good, they're going to know what you want to do, and then they're not going to do that thing.
And that's my problem. That was my problem the whole time. Is like, if I throw my flagellants against a really good player, they're not going to attack flagellants. They're like, no, I'm going to attack the good thing. And I couldn't quite get over that hurdle. I think that was kind of where I left my thinking. I'm like, this just seems too hard.
Well, make them great swords, and then maybe they'll kill them, because great swords actually do damage.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there's new battle tactics like having banners as well, so that would probably work quite nicely. And I have tried the flagellant battle tactic. Just don't.
No, that actually Cities of Sigmar battle tactic with the banners is really good. It won me a game because it lets me play the castle game even longer than anyone else. Because I'm like, okay, I'll just sit on these objectives with these blackguard.
That's a really good battle tactic. The flagellants and having flagellants not in enemy territory and then ends in enemy territory, and no, I don't want to have 2 units of flagellants. At least in Phoenician maybe, but in any other city, no. All right, this is getting into a weird tangent. Jeremy, you have been an absolute legend. Thank you for this discussion. I definitely much more thoughtful and insightful of Phoenician. You've convinced me. You have changed my mind.
Well, maybe you'll see more Phoenician players, so then people will be like, "Oh, this is what this army does." It's supposed to show up me like, "What does this do?"
Yeah, like what does it do? All right, let's peace out. Thank you, Jeremy, for your time. Thanks everyone for joining us on the chat. As always, roll more sixes. Thanks for sticking around until the end. I hope you found that video interesting and you walked away with a few new ideas. If you did, I would appreciate it if you hit like on the video, as well as left me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. The conversation will continue over on Discord, so links down below in the episode description if you want to join the Discord and continue the Age of Sigmar conversation. I want to give a massive shout out as well to these absolute bloody legends, these champions who have continued to support me through Patreon or YouTube members. That is going directly into supporting the maintenance and the growth of this channel. So thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated. And until next time, roll more sixes.